Hello, everyone. It looks like we've managed to get Parliament prorogued. It's only for a short while, and it's definitely not what Boris originally planned, but it's still definitely useful. So, after all his trying, we've managed to get Parliament to be prorogued for 6 days, and right now, as I record this, they're in the process of carrying out the prorogation. It was very frustrating that the Supreme Court saw fit to interfere in political rulings, given the fact that, that they're supposed to be impartial, it's supposed to be completely separate from politics. So, it's absolutely frustrating. And in case some of you aren't aware, the Supreme Court is not a body that has been around for a long time. I always assumed it was because it sounds like it. But no, the Supreme Court has only been around since 2009. So definitely not a long time. And definitely not a long time to have traditions and have to decide where they should stand. They should definitely be following the other legislative bodies of the country. Sorry, not legislative, judicial. So, as it says in this article here, they've said here that, well, we're closing up tonight, and there'll be no debates, which is great, very excellent, and it's only going to be for 6 days, which is part of the original suspension, so it'll go until 14th of October. And the official reason is that the Prime Minister wants to set out a fresh legislative program, which is, might be true, might not be true, I don't know. I think it might be a cover. But what's brilliant about all this is the fact that, it just kind of disrupts the usual procedure. And I was reading up on the procedure of prorogation just earlier, and honestly, it's so ridiculously pompous. They've got the black rod that has to knock on the door 3 times, and has the doors, and traditionally will have the door slammed in their face and has to knock again. And it's like, why? That's such a waste of time. And not to mention, the black rod has like their own team for overseeing the business of the House of Lords and all sorts of stuff. I get that Britain has its traditions, and it's quite fascinating and interesting, and there's a certain sort of what's the word? There's a certain uniqueness and fascination to the traditions, but honestly, I would say that at some point you're just wasting time and money, and you're making the government less efficient. But hey, we are talking about government, so inefficiency is part and parcel. So yeah, I think that it's great to see that they've got a prorogation in place. I imagine they had to prorogue Parliament at some point. But what I'm interested in is this schedule here at the end of this article. I know I've just skimmed through that, but it's just a quick one. So it says here that Parliament is being prorogued for the Queen's speech today, on the 8th of October, and on the 14th of October, the government will set out its plans for the Queen's speech. And then on the 17th and 18th of October, the EU Leaders Summit in Brussels will be the very last point at which they can agree on a Brexit agreement, finalize that. And it says here that in practice, it would need to have been hammered out a few days before. And then the real contention, the real key point here for me is the 19th of October. Boris Johnson is required under the so-called Benn Act to ask the EU for a delay to Brexit if a withdrawal has not been agreed by the state. Now that is the question that is on my mind, and it's probably on a lot of people's minds at this point, which is, what is Boris Johnson going to do about this? Because he's got quite a few options. He can do a little bit of discussion with a few other member states and possibly get them to veto the extension. Or, and this is an unlikely one, Johnson might just not send the letter. I know he said he has, but we were seeing mixed messages a while back where they were saying that he wasn't going to go for no deal, and then at the same time he was saying on Twitter that they're going to go for no deal, and there's a lot of mixed messages like that. So I'm not so sure that even though he said he's going to send the letter, send the extension agreement, that he actually will. But then again, I also don't trust the Prime Minister. I don't trust the Tories at all. And I don't really have a reason to. So, yeah, I'm not holding my breath. He might actually just send a letter, or maybe he'll actually get a crappy agreement in place. At this point, he is the elected Prime Minister, so there's not much we can do. But I think it's definitely one to watch. It's good to see that we did get a prorogation, but it's too little, too late probably. I think the fact that they've got the ban act in place to start with was ridiculous, and it's probably botched up whatever plans Boris might have had if he did have plans. So I guess it's kind of a case of waiting. But I reckon if we have another extension, I don't really see how much longer people will hold on. Even Remainers at this point are tired, and there's many. I was listening to BBC Radio 4 just earlier today, and the amount of talk about Brexit these days is just so frequent and so often spoke about. It's like the only thing that we can talk about in the UK right now. And I do agree with the Lib Dems, honestly, that we need to focus on other things. And I got myself wondering this morning whether or not, some politicians might be using the whole Brexit ordeal to get other things on the side, to make other things happen, to make other laws and put other laws in place, because no one's paying attention, because we're also focused on Brexit. It could be done. So, yeah, I do feel like, annoyingly, I agree with the Lib Dems that we do need to just move on. But to me, that doesn't mean giving up. That doesn't mean just giving the EU what they want. It doesn't mean dropping the referendum. It means leaving the bloody EU, because that is what we agreed to. I've done my research. I've checked exactly what was written on the Electoral Commission reports. And the plan was to leave the EU without a deal. And without a deal meaning, as in, we leave all of their structures. We leave the EU's market. We leave the single market. We leave the customs union. We say goodbye to all that, because it wasn't working for us. And this was arrangements and deals that were going to be made back in 2015 and 2016. Those deals were never arranged. We already had the time to make deals with the EU, and that time passed. And the UK citizens and voters said, we didn't get the deal we wanted. We didn't get any arrangements. We want to leave. And they chose to leave. So for me, that's just it. I don't care what Boris Johnson does. I don't care what Parliament decides. They held a referendum, and the precedent is you enact what the results of the referendum dictate. And the referendum results dictated exactly what was promised by the elected Prime Minister at the time, which was to leave the EU, to leave the customs union, to leave the single market. Nothing more, nothing less. Maybe more. And to me, I can make plenty of arguments as to why we're not going to be struck horribly and economically. I can make all sorts of arguments as to why we need to lower immigration. I can make all sorts of arguments as to how horrible the EU is, to try and convince people. But at this point, I don't care about convincing anyone, because the results were clear. It was the biggest poll that has been taken on the referendum, and no other poll is going to trump that, whatever. It's nothing more legitimate than a nationwide ballot of every single voting citizen of the United Kingdom. So, let's see what happens with this prorogation, and let's hope that Boris Johnson has a card up his sleeve. But if not, I'm not going to let this lie. Personally, I don't. I don't think that I'm willing to go for 3 years and watch myself get ignored, watch my decision be just completely frustrated. We'd made a decision, and I thought we were going to lose. I thought it was going to be Remain. And if it had been Remain, even if it was such a tiny margin, I would have said, that sucks, and let's carry on. And the funny thing is, we could have left the EU years ago. If Parliament and the government had just said, that sucks, we lost, let's leave. They can be reluctant, they can do it begrudgingly. They could have, but they didn't. And the UK population are not happy. Whether they voted leave or remain, they're not happy. This has to be pulled like a band-aid. It should have been pulled like a band-aid, but it hasn't. And at this point, we've got a festering wound. And I don't think it's going to be healed very easily. Especially not if we don't leave.